Hello, I'm just going to talk to you a bit about a Mini Cooper that I had with a misfire, cylinder 1 misfire. Diagnosed the car, it was no compression on one cylinder, it wasn't to do with ignition or a spark. Fuel injector was hard to get at to check that one. Maybe I could have gone to the fuse with an amp clamp, but I didn't. I just did basic stuff with a compression gauge because the plugs were easy to get to. And I found out that there was no compression was the fault, cylinder 1, and it was an exhaust fault. Doing a leak down, I was losing the air, losing the pressure through the exhaust valve. So after knowing this, I put on a picoscope to see how easy would it have been, instead of putting a compression gauge in and then putting a leak down tester in and getting the cylinder to the right place, turning the crankshaft and going through all that. I thought, how easy would it have been just to do it running with a pico or any oscilloscope. So I used a pulse sensor in the exhaust. The pulse sensor that I used was a Diagnostics, but I suppose it wouldn't matter which one you had. Put that in the exhaust. I already knew it was an exhaust fault, and I thought, I'm going to see an exhaust leak on the compression stroke of the faulty cylinder. Set up the ignition with a sync on cylinder 1, but of course on cylinder 1 there was no compression. So with this car firing using a wasted spark, both cylinder 1 and cylinder 4 had low ignition spikes. It wasn't very high compared to if I went into put the sync onto cylinder 4. I would have seen each time that cylinder 4 fires, it has a higher ignition spike on the waveform, whereas the wasted spark that would be the exhaust stroke of an engine where it fires again, that would have been the lower one. But of course, if you're using it on cylinder 1, knowing that it's got no compression, it was kind of a waste of time, because all the wasted spark and the actual firing event would all happen with low compression. So I had to move the sync to cylinder 4. So that was just something I didn't think about, but it was still a quicker test to do it. And I was just going to show you this little clip. I didn't record all of it. It was just something to show you so that you know, if you don't get a sync on one cylinder, move it to the companion cylinder if it's wasted spark, just in case you are on a cylinder that has no compression. I hadn't thought about it, considering I already knew the car had no compression. Anyway, thought I'd share it with you. Hopefully it's useful to somebody. Looking at a Mini Cooper with a misfire, ends up being that it's leaking through a valve on the exhaust. So I was checking it with this, and one thing, I actually had it set as cylinder 1 that was faulty. Don't know if you can see that. Cylinder 1 was faulty, and I was using this to get a sync from the ignition on the plug lead. But of course, because there was no compression, all of these were the same, so we get the wasted sparks got a smaller spike, and I hadn't thought about that. So there was no big one where there's compression, and small one, they were all small, because I put the sync onto the cylinder that's got low compression, so these all look the same. So to make sense of it, I've moved the sync to 4. Now that's clearly, you can see there's something different there, but it's just something to let, well, you probably knew it, but I was putting the sync onto the cylinder with the low compression, so all these spark lines would look the same height, because it's like, if it's firing out the cylinder, it doesn't have to jump as high, or if there's no compression in the cylinder, the spark line doesn't have to jump as high, and the wasted spark on the exhaust stroke doesn't have to jump as high. So I had to move it to the other cylinder. So I've got it on that one instead of cylinder 1.